Perhaps in the meantime, we have one of our lovely student ambassadors here with us today, Elise. She is a first-year student of the MIA herself. And so I would like to invite you to use this time where we are trying to figure out technology to direct some questions towards Elise, and maybe she can tell you a little bit more about her experience at Hertie so far. Thanks so much again for your patience, and please feel welcome to ask Elise a few questions in the next few minutes.
So I see a question. Can you give some advice on the application essays and processes? I think Sarah can give better advice on that, maybe. And then another question, how did you fund your studies? So I have a partial tuition fee waiver. And then on top of that, I am working as a student assistant for the executive education team for 20 hours a week. And then I also have a student loan with the Dutch government. So with all of that together, I managed to fund my studies at Hertie. No problem. Then the next question, insights into my week at Hertie. Yeah, it's my weeks at Hertie are quite busy. We usually have at least 4 classes a week. If we have classes that have labs, we have 2 classes for that subject. So usually between 4 to 6 classes, and each lasts about 2 hours. And then in between that, I work as a student assistant as well. So I plan my work hours around the times that I have classes. And then in addition to that, we also have a lot of activities going on at Hertie. There's lots of really interesting events and student clubs that organize things. So I actually spend most of my day at campus, usually from about 9 to 10 a.m. until 4 to 6 p.m. And yeah, I enjoy it a lot.
Hello. We are almost in business, I think. Let me just try to add Sylvia back into the room and make sure that it works. Thanks so much, Elise, for answering some questions. I'm not sure which exactly is the correct Sylvia to add into the room, but let's see if it works.
Can you hear me? I can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Sorry for that, and thank you so much, Elise, for basically stepping in. Like, I don't know, 2.5 years after, no, longer after COVID, and still, like, there's still something that doesn't work all the time. I'm very, very sorry. Thank you so much for all the people that have joined in and waited. I tried literally everything right now, other than basically throwing my laptop out of the street, but it was very close, very, very close. Sorry for that, everyone.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for your patience and for hanging around. I promise we have a lovely presentation for you today. So thank you for bearing with us. As we know, technology is sometimes not our friend, but hopefully it will be great for us the rest of the time. So thank you very much. I'm going to dive right into things so that we can make sure that we get through all of the content. We will all introduce ourselves briefly in a moment before Sylvia presents. But before we do that, just a few housekeeping items. This is the second event of the Berlin Bound series, which is aimed towards admitted and incoming students to help you have a better idea of what to expect when you arrive at the Hertie School. If you are not an admitted or incoming student, you are still welcome to be here, but you might find that the information is a little bit less relevant to you. So for that reason, I would like it if we can keep the questions in this session a little bit focused. This is not intended to be a general info session, but we will be happy to talk to you about that at another point in time. So this session today in specific is to talk really about the International Law course, which is a core course of the MIA. But also some general questions about the MIA will also be appropriate. Thank you so much again for coming. The last thing before we take off is to please use the Q&A function. You can do that by clicking the small bubble that has a question mark in it next to the chat, and that will send it to the Q&A mode, and we will go into the Q&A at the end of the session and go through all of the questions. And so without further ado, my name is Sarah Fisher, and I am part of the recruitment and admissions team here at the Hertie School. I have been living in Berlin for about 4 years, but I'm originally from the US, and I'm very happy to have you all here today. So I will hand it off to Elise and Sylvia to both introduce themselves before Sylvia begins her presentation.
Thank you so much. I'm following, and then comes Elise. So my name is Sylvia Steininger. It's actually Dr. Sylvia Steininger. I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at the Hertie School, at especially also the Center for Fundamental Rights. So basically, if you want to focus on questions of international law and human rights, you would do a lot also with the center. And I will talk a bit about the center and how basically students can get involved in the activities also of the center. Because for us, it's really, really important that it's not just, you're studying, but the idea is also to get you acquainted with, for example, the human rights, international law crowd in Berlin. And I'm also like the module coordinator for international law forthcoming. So I'm one of the 3 people that hopefully, if you want to start studying with us in this winter term, you will see. Next to me, this is Professor John Moraine, who is basically replacing Professor Başak Çağlı. Professor John Moraine comes from the University of Groningen, and he basically will change the course a bit. He was Professor of International Relations, so basically this focus of international law and international relations will be really big. And for the very first time, we also will introduce a labs, so basically where you will practice, for example, international pleading and international writing with one of our PhD students. This is Joe Finnerty, most probably, who's also running the CHESUP, so an international law moot court where you could also participate in the future. So I'm here because I had Elise also as my student the last semester, and in that sense, I will be the continuous link to also the future intake in that sense, but I will be only one of 3 people, and the others are way more fabulous and great than me in that sense. But bear with me for this short session. And again, many apologies for all the confusion. Yes, and we take into account the Inter-American human rights system. I wrote my PhD about the European and Inter-American human rights system in a comparative exercise. And I'm very happy to talk about this more further down the line. But first of all, the floor goes to Elise, who was so kind to step in already.
All right. So hi, my name is Elise. I'm Dutch, and I just finished my first year at Hertie. And I've also only been living in Berlin for 1 year now. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Elise. As I already mentioned, Elise is one of our student ambassadors, so she's really here to share with you her experience as a student. So you can direct questions really about the student experience towards her. And this slide very briefly is just to remind you what you probably already know, is that this is what your first semester as an MIA student will or would look like. These are your 4 core courses, and you will have 1 skills workshop. And today we are going to focus on the core course that is international law. So at this point, I will hand it over to Sylvia. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you all. What level of, first of all, question in the chat, what level of knowledge of international law is expected of students? This course is very, very broad. You all come from like an amazing number of countries, of jurisdictions. Some of you might have done law in the past, some might have even done international law. But the general idea is that we expect no knowledge about international law. We had people in our classes which came from management, from business, from the humanities, from really like all kinds of degrees, and that's in all kinds of jurisdiction. And I think that makes the course very special. But also means sometimes that people who studied law before, in that sense, they would have like maybe an an early advantage in the first courses. But I think even if people studied international or law before, the way we teach this course might be slightly different from what they did before. So in that sense, no knowledge is required. So who am I? I thought, okay, maybe let's introduce myself with three pictures that you see here on the slides. First of all, this was my very first day at Hertie, where they put me next to this Hertie like teddy bear. But I think it kind of gets a good impression of who I am. I'm someone I think who considers herself very approachable. I moved to Berlin 2 years ago. I'm going a bit sooner where I studied in a second. I also am someone who has a dog. So you see in the middle, I bring my dog to work with me. So you can, if you go to the center, you can see her. And then finally, I'm someone who also contributes a lot and researches a lot and writes a lot, and particularly on question of public international law from a multi-perspective approach. So what is really important for me is that there's not just one way to look at international law, but actually there are multiple ways to look at international law. We also not in the way we teach international law, we not only take into account like what we call the doctrinal or the mainstream view of international law, but for example also like a critical approach to critically reflect how international law came to be. We will do more on the feminist and post-colonial approach in the future, also something to really reflect and have multiple perspectives how international law is. When I studied international law, it was usually German, white, male, old professors, and there was a particular way they basically also looked at international law. And what Hertie want to do is we want to change this and also influence you more to really reflect and critically reevaluate what international law is. Who am I? So basically, I'm also based in Berlin. I moved to Berlin 2 years ago, but of course I was a student once and I did a lot of internships here, so I know the city for quite a while. Originally I come from political science, so my first degree was in international relations. I have a bachelor's in international relations and German public law. Then I did an MA in political science from the University of Heidelberg and an LLM in international law from the University of Amsterdam. And now have a PhD in law with a focus on human rights law, regional comparative human rights law from the University of Frankfurt. I'm a postdoctoral researcher and international law lecturer since last year at the Hertie School, and I really appreciate it. I learn a lot from my students, especially because they come from various also like levels of background and experience, and especially have sometimes very personal experience with international law and how it really also reflects on their life, which is something that I really like to hear and really like to appreciate. I have been a research fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Comparative Public Law and International Law. So this is Germany's main research institute for international law. It is based in Heidelberg. This is also where I will do my PhD, and where, for example, we were working on all questions of like comparative public law, European law, and international law. I worked quite closely with NGOs in that sense. So we had a lot of focus on how to, for example, also use the knowledge that we have to influence kind of global change. And this is also, I think, a mission that is shared by Hertie and many of the Hertie students. I've been a visiting lecturer all over Europe in that sense. I will be at the College of Europe, at the Police Academy Brandenburg is a new interesting thing, at the University of Amsterdam, where I supervise master thesis, at the Karlsruhe Karlsruhe and the Université Catholique Lille in France. What is important for me and for many people who work at the center and at the international law team at Hertie School is that we really not only look at international law, how it's in the books, but also how it's in practice. So we have a close cooperation with like basically international law or human rights institutions in practice, in particular courts, for example, the European Court on Human Rights, but I work quite closely with the Inter-American Court of Human Rights as well as NGOs who work on questions of international law and human rights. And this is something that also we would like to kind of get people, students connected with those kind of institutions and of potential employers. And with that, I will basically get back to in the end. So where are we? Basically, I'm not going to like the facts and figures program, but usually this international law class is in the Masters of International Affairs. So in that sense, we know you all come from different backgrounds, from different education systems. So the idea is really we start from scratch, but of course this is a graduate course, so we'll pick up steam quite a bit in that sense. So this is not something that we basically expect you to have any previous knowledge, but we expect you, for example, to keep yourself informed. So for example, in our syllabus, it said like you should watch the news. No, you should be engaged. You should follow what's going to happen. International law is a very dynamic subject in that sense. We also have a list of movies. International law is everywhere in the movies. So in that sense, there's some kind of other ways how to be informed and how to keep informed about international law matters. How we are going to do is basically at the center and at the school is we use international law in Berlin as what we call a human rights classroom. So the idea is not just, you can study international law also in The Hague or in New York, but you can also study it in Berlin. And Berlin might have a particular unique way to approach this question, not only from German history, but also about the very multicultural and diverse kind of population that we currently have here, and also the type of human rights NGOs and institutions that we also try to get you into contact. Tell us about origin and sources of IL. This is something we're getting to that in a second, because it's one class in that sense. So international law, what we mean by international law, there is a very common definition as the body of rules binding on states in their relations with one another and determining their mutual rights and obligations. So a very big part is studying what states kind of owe each other, which kind of interpret treaties do we have, what do states have to do. But states are not the only actors in international law. No, Elise knows very well. So we look, for example, what international organizations are doing. We also look what human beings are doing, individuals. We look at what business corporations are doing. So all of those are also kind of involved in shaping international law. So the idea that it's just states making the rules is not something that is quite up to date in that sense. In general, you can differentiate between two areas. On the one hand, general international law, and on the other hand, it's often called specialized regimes of international law. So general international law is basically the rules that states have, also, like, for example, in the International Court of Justice, the World Court in The Hague. And specialized regimes of international law are, for example, human rights law, migration law, international criminal law, space law is also something that we did in that sense, environmental law, and so on. What if a state does not abide by the ICJ or ICC? Again, one basically perfect lecture we had there was on questions on enforcement and non-compliance. And this is something that is really a major factor in this course. Also, what are the limitations of international law? What is kind of the political aspect? Because sometimes when the law ends is where the politics begin, and vice versa. We will the class go in depth with the Geneva Conventions and cases of breach. So this would be international humanitarian law. We are currently in the process of kind of reshaping this class, because international law is super dynamic. The last year it was not really there, because the Geneva Convention is one of a very old thing, and you would think, laws of war are not as important anymore. But as the last years have shown, that laws of war are incredibly important. And I think in that sense, we will focus a lot on those questions in the future. Any other question? Did I miss any question? No? No. Okay, great. So basically, we have to focus between general international law and specialized regimes of international law. Of course, there are a lot of very, very current events and issues of international law. And this is something that's also very important to center in this course, as it's very dynamic, it is evolving, it comes from multiple perspectives. What you see here, you might basically recognize also lots of different of those pictures. You see here also, for example, can we talk about recent conflicts and violations of IHL states? Perfect. Yes, we can talk about that maybe after I give the introduction. But what you see here is kind of related to that. So you see, for example, the opera in Mariupol in Ukraine. This is something, for example, we have worked quite closely with Human Rights Watch and digital forensic NGOs in Berlin, and have organized recently also an event with them. Because of course, like the opera, you see here also Deti children being painted in front of the opera, making this actually like a not protected, but in that sense, the strike on the opera house, a violation of international humanitarian law. You see also here on the bottom, you see, for example, the questions of border and border violence, refugees. In that sense, refugee law and migration law has been a central component of this course. But of course, our states are using a lot of different tools, also legal tools, to kind of bar refugees from entering, and what are the type of kind of debates there. I think a big focus of last year's course was the question about Frontex. So what are the kind of limitation and rights and duties of Frontex and Frontex states here is one of those questions, of course, which is quite fundamental to understand how we treat refugees and how we treat basically also migrants coming into our cities. You see, of course, here in the center, you see the World Court, the International Court of Justice, and you see the recent cases that we have concerning Gaza. There are currently 2 cases pending. One is being brought by South Africa against Israel directly under the Genocide Convention. Another one is being brought by Nicaragua against Germany due to the question of an alleged complicity of Germany, for example, by providing weapons or transferring arms in the alleged genocide of the Gazan population. This is something we will also discuss quite, I think, closely in the future course in that sense. What does the space shuttle indicate? Yeah, there's actually not a space shuttle. This is the supposedly Mars station, how Elon Musk thinks the Mars will be colonized in that sense, what he will build there. This is something that we also discuss quite a lot, I think, in the course, is that what is actually the responsibility, what are the rights of business actors, of global corporations in that sense, and how can we protect spheres, for example, like the moon, which has a special immune trees. And then I think on the top level, you see, for example, the question of climate. Question of climate are, of course, core and center, because they threaten all human rights in that sense if they are in peril here. And you see, I think these are recent pictures on the flooding in Brazil, and the question of how can we find a system, what is the role of international organizations in protecting climate, and also safeguarding vulnerable people from climate change consequences which they face today. So there are already a few questions in the chat. I can't even follow them. Can we talk about recent conflicts and violations of IHL? Yeah, career after studying international law. So international law is, of course, only one of your subjects here. In principle, we give you a broad, in this course, we give you a broad understanding. Of course, then if you want to continue that, you can do the master specialization in human rights and global governance and international law. And this can, I think, students of this class have gone to various options. Now, some of them might gone back to their home countries and studied law or in the legal field. Others were, for example, more in like the diplomatic service, in legal advice, in NGOs. I think is a very big part. But also all types of like journalistic endeavors are something where it's a good grounding in international law. I think very, very, very helpful. Yeah, the space shuttle, this is not the space shuttle, this is the Mars station, how Elon Musk thinks he will colonize Mars, even though there is a treaty that's protecting Mars as a kind of common space for all mankind, especially about all the questions of how we should share those resources then if we at some point really start to like dig into Mars here. But yeah, you see a lot of different examples are very, very prominent, and they're just developing. So we're now in the process of doing the new syllabus, and we always try to include it, like kick some examples out, put some in. This is really good. What practical experience do we get when studying international law? I'm getting to that in a second here.
Really
to give you
Sylvia, you can also wait until the end for the questions, and then I can also sort through them so you don't have to try to
otherwise it's like
them during the presentation, because I know it can feel a little overwhelming. So
I feel like a football, like it just keep going. Great, it's fantastic that you have so many questions, because they're the right questions to have when you start this course in that sense. I think in that sense, I'm not sure Elise can of course contradict me, but I think international law always sometimes gives you more questions than answers, and this is kind of what this course is supposed to do. So in terms of course aims, so we have, those will probably remain the same. So what we want you to understand in this course, a clear grasp of legal concepts, of theories, and what we call doctrines. So the rules, how international law works. So how should we interpret treaties? What are the rights of states? What are the responsibilities of states? Then we want to basically get you familiarized with the knowledge of the sources of international law. No, there was a question, I think, what are the sources of international law? This is something you should know at the end. No, it's like treaties, but it's also state practice, for example, or opinio juris. So what are basically states and decision makers thinking how law should be? And a big factor in that sense, and I've already said that it will change that, is how to interpret and use them in legal analysis. So basically how you actually can use those kind of legal sources to, for example, answer your like little questions in that sense. So the exam very often is a so-called scenario. So you get, for example, a fictitious state and another fictitious state, and then there's a war or there's something like that, and the question for you is that what is the legal basis about that? Can a claim be brought before a court in that sense? And this is the kind of scenario-based exam we want you to basically be able to answer at the end of this course. However, as this is not a law school, no, we don't give you an LLM, you're a Master's of International Affairs, a good understanding of what the international law perspective is in selected policy contexts. So of course, international law is not everything that kind of structures our global governance. Some of you have said it, no, like what about enforcement? Whether international law is clear, what happens when the ICJ says you shouldn't do that? What it at the moment says quite often, but states are still doing it. So it's something that we really want to have a good understanding, but are also the limitations of international law and what other ways of, for example, compliance can we enforce. And then finally, also to able to construct and appraise international law arguments in different policy contexts. No, we have a lot of debates at the moment. No, you would just open the news like international law says that, and then international law says that. So I want you to understand in that sense, okay, it's more complicated than just yes or no very often. No, a good lawyer does need to know in that sense also how to find like the interpretation, and that there are various questions which can be right. So there's not always a yes or no kind of questions. Lots of questions already. Practical exam, yeah. This kind of human rights LLM. So does it prepare you for an LLM? I would say yes. I think it, but it also goes much broader than an LLM. So the International Law core course is just one course, but of course then you have the sufficient ACTS to do a specific like human rights LLM in that sense. So yes, and it's possible to write thesis with lots of people work on international law and human rights in the center. Yeah, do I still need to take the international course from my MA? Yes, this is a core course, you have to do it. You're not like I think we have, I would say like 1/4 or 1/5 has actually studied international law or law before. At least might contradict me or like please correct me in that sense. But I think in that sense, because we will be very hands-on in that sense, you might have basically something that you have already known, but other things might be very new to you in that sense. Yeah, we still have to do it. Is international law tackled in the international security curriculum as well? I don't know, but we all do it in the Masters of International Affairs, so international law is a core course, even if I think later you tackle international security. I think we have a lot of people who say, oh, no, don't want to do human rights, I rather do international security. And the course will prepare you for both, because we will talk a lot also about questions of war, of statehood, of international kind of humanitarian law as well. I might have not answered all the questions. Yeah. I cannot be forced like domestic law. How can it be forced using any force if any state doesn't respect international law? So the enforcement of international law, it's a specific section in that sense. And we have various ways. So one, of course, is judicial decisions. And judicial decisions, for example, the National Court of Justice, the United Nations Security Council could enforce that. But of course, and here basically the political aspect comes into play. The United Nations Security Council will only take measures when all the veto states do not use their veto. And this is, for example, at the moment, a big problem. And this kind of, conflicts that can arise also in international institutions, something we'll tackle quite a bit. However, there are various ways also, like maybe not in ICJ decisions, but others, for example, international arbitration judgments, which can be enforced through domestic courts. And of course, we should also look at questions of enforcement, which are more softer. So, for example, through diplomatic ways, or for example, through sanctions procedures. No, very often, even if it's not enforced, we can have the sanction procedure involved in that. What is normative hierarchy? So we're already listening to the slides here. So this is basically what we did last year. We basically will ramp it up for the next semester, but just to give you an overview of what is currently covered. First is kind of this introduction, then the question of state sovereignty. What is a state? Why do we have states? When is a state a state? So is Palestine now a state? At what point can we actually say something is a state? How do you acquire statehood? No, for example, questions of independence, no, Scotland, Catalonia, and so on. Normative hierarchy international laws means that is every international law at the same weight? Does one international law trump the other international law? Because we have a lot of international law. It's everywhere in the world. But is human rights law, for example, does it trump questions of kind of obligations under international economic law, under trade disputes in that sense? Sources, like I said, so where can we find international law? In judicial decisions, in state practice, in opinio juris, enforcement and compliance. I think I already discussed that. Part 2 would be an issue areas. This also we're going to keep. So we will focus on selected issue areas. So one, of course, is the question of statehood. So when is a state a state? When can we identify something as a state? How can you acquire statehood? What happens there? I think it's a very popular topic always for students. One other thing that I taught was international economic law. So what about trade law, investment law, financial law, and particularly how does it impact questions of human rights or sustainable development? Another big thing, and probably much bigger in the future, will be military use of force and the laws of armed conflict. So what about wars? When can you intervene? When can you exercise self-defense? Against whom can you exercise self-defense? What about, for example, collective peacekeeping forces by the United Nations? What are the rules here? International crimes. This is something international criminal law, which also becomes, I think, more and more prominent in the news every day at the moment. Questions of war crimes, of crimes against humanity, of genocide. How can they be basically brought against individuals very often? So I think last week you saw that there will probably be some cases, some pending applications against both Israeli high-profile politicians as well as Palestinian or Gazan-based actors. International refugee and state responsibility, also something I think I already mentioned. So what about state responsibility for violations of international refugee law at the borders? And then finally, also questions of global commons and climate action. So especially when we all have to go together to protect the climate, how can we do it? Which type of institutions do we exist? Which type of rules do exist for basically transnational action here? Shed light on the Palestine-Israel state relationship. That's a very big issue. I can't really give justice towards it because it's also very, very, very dynamic. And I think in that sense, it's something we will discuss in class for sure. And it's also something that's changing at the moment. In general, what I can say is, of course, that there are some criteria that states have to fulfill. But there's another question, which is basically like, does it need to be accepted as a state? And this is like the moment where the Palestine debate is kind of ongoing. On the one hand, you have the criteria. And in that sense, you could say that Palestine, the Palestinian territory, is kind of fulfilling that. On the other hand, the question is, at what point do states have to accept Palestine as a state? And this is something that you see at the moment. That various states have various opinions on that. And this is a very interesting thing, because if there's no consensus, we really have to question, like, what are the kind of rules of international law for this? What kind of other cases do we have in the past? And this is something we're going to discuss, I think, quite a bit in this debate. Any other question? You mentioned climate policy. I have to go more with European energy resources and conflict arising within ILNR. Nuclear energy, cutting down Russian energy sources. Of course, this is a very, very specifically question on how to study climate change and how the law works in that sense. I think we have, at least in international economic law, discussed questions of how it interrelates with sustainable development, how it relates to human rights. But in that sense, we have focused more on international questions. So in that sense, how, for example, UNFCCC and UNEP, how this works and how they make rules and what happens there. For example, also the Paris Agreement. That would we study about the EU Parliament? The EU, of course, is a special legal regime here. It is kind of related to international law because the EU is sometimes also considered an actor, and of course, it makes a lot of rules also for its member states. But the EU Parliament, as such, this is going to be studied at the global politics kind of parallel course that we're having, which is focusing more on questions of international relations and political science as such. Any other question I missed? No. I don't think so. So how do we teach international law? I think this is something that might be different or might be similar from what you did before. So one thing that is really important is hands-on learning. And this is, for example, also why we introduced now the 2 weeks with the PhD student in that sense. So he did the JESUP. This is the International Law Moot Court, where every university can send one like specialized team, and he was coaching those. And the Hertie students have even been the second ranking student group in Germany. So they went to Washington, D.C. to plead before actual international judges. Which is fantastic because like they were not law students, like they just did this course and they were able to do that and have been able to kind of be the second best group out of, I think, 60 in Germany. It really tells you something about that. And so Joe is going to do that. And the idea is really to help you how to apply international law to specific cases. Of course, these are hypothetical cases, but have very, very specific. Also how to read international court decisions because they're very often very, very long, 100, 200 pages, how to really find that. Then what we want to do and how we're going to study this. This is not a lecture style university. So the idea is to be very interactive, to have a lot of class debates. Might be too many the last semester. So we will cut down a bit on the debates, on the debating team in that sense. But the idea really is to have a basically continuous dialogue with you guys and to share about that. And then the final thing is also to let you critically reflect on what you learn. So we're not training you as international lawyers, as barristers in that sense. That would be a particular different thing. But what we're going to teach you, or what we're going to train you, is how to really reflect also about the normative questions of international law, about power, of equality, of questions of fundamental rights, of democracy and the rule of law, and also about basically who are we missing when we only look at states, for instance. So how can participation in the CHESAP Moot Court be embedded? So the CHESAP Moot Court is part of the degree. So the students which are participating are getting, I think, a course credit for it and some kind of extension. So it's particularly a specific course. You're not taking a semester off. Which is, for me, was also new. Like in Germany, usually people take a semester off. Here they don't, and they still really rock. So in that sense, it tells you something that they're really, really great. So they basically are just choosing it as a course in that sense. How can you participate in the debate team? So I'm not sure if we have a debating society in the Hertie. I don't know, maybe Elise knows that. I think there are some in Berlin, but basically the idea in our class was that we do debates in class. So if you like debating and if you like to kind of participate, this could be great for you. Anything else? How will the course be graded? What essays and other assignment are expected? So the idea is to have more than one examination forum. So we'll have an exam at the end, and as I explained, the exam will be hypothetical. And we're going to train you for answering that exam. Another thing will be an examination during the semester. So last year, for example, we did debate notes. So basically, when you did your debate, you basically write down what you learned. Another option we're currently discussing is some kind of mini moot court exercises that you have this kind of like you would be on before a court. So the idea is in that sense to not only focus so much on the final exam at the end, but also give you another option to kind of show your knowledge and your skills in international law. So in that sense, it's less essays because this is an international law course, but probably something like a written case during the semester and one final written exam at the end. Does that help? I think I answered that question. Finally, I think that would be my international law questions, and I would go a bit in the Center for Fundamental Rights. What is my name? Sylvia is my name. So in that sense, what is the Center of Fundamental Rights? Because I'm also a postdoc at the center, and there are various ways for students to get involved. So we have a lot of different centers at the Hertie School. These are centers of competence. So the idea is that they're also researchers. So we have PhD students there. We have also research assistants. Not many, but I think we have 4 or 5 students who also work at the center next to their degree program and help us, for example, organizing events and conferences, or helping us, for example, with footnotes or research tasks. And in general, the Hertie School has 5 centers: Center for International Security, Center for Digital Governance, Center for Sustainability, Jacques Delors Center, and the Data Science Lab. So it's Jacques Delors Lab, no, it's Jacques Delors Center and Data Science Lab, and the Center for Fundamental Rights. And you see here on this lovely slides some of the focus section of the center so far. So you see on the one hand, we really look into questions of law and institutions. So the idea is really to look into how, for example, different types of courts function. No? Like I said, I work, for example, on comparative human rights courts, but also we have a big project here on United Nations treaty bodies. So the focus is on human rights treaty bodies and of international organizations more generally. So for example, the UNHCR, like the refugee kind of international organizations, were a major focus of the work here. But also something, for example, like the dispute settlement body of META, this is sort of the emerging kind of fora for international lawmaking. On the left, you see the contemporary challenges that we at the moment tackle. So one of the challenges is new technologies. So we have a lot of people work on questions of digital technologies and human rights. So how can fundamental rights be protected, for example, in the Digital Service Act by the EU? Another focus is asylum and migration. So how can we make how especially tech also influences that, because very often asylum and migration issues or proceedings are currently influenced by technical issues. The climate crisis is a central factor. Our colleague Juan Aus and Professor Başak Şale worked quite a bit on that. Also regionally, we also have a new colleague from India who's working on the climate crisis in the South Asian region, and basically what states can do and what their obligations of states are here. And then finally, questions of authoritarianism is also something which is quite central. Look, how can we protect human rights and democracy in times when we have increasing authoritarianism? So I work, for example, on questions of Russia, Turkey, Venezuela, Nicaragua, which of course has been states that have been quite open about, for example, not complying with human rights decisions. Who is the new member? I can send you her name in a second. It's Chaya, but the last name I'm always mispronouncing. But if you go to the Center for Fundamental Rights, you find her last name. She's coming to work for here. She's there for a year, and she's gonna basically focus on climate crisis and the implications of climate change in the South Asian region. There are many people at the center who also teach. You see here basically from last year. So I taught international law with Başak Çağlar. We also have questions about global ethic, human rights and global governance key challenges. Another course we will do in the first year in the spring. I haven't taken it, maybe Elise knows more about that. And in the second year, you'll do electives. And those electives can change quite a bit depending on, in that sense, who's working at the center. But so far, and that's just what you see here on the slides, we have a special course on climate crisis and human rights by Dr. Juan Outs. We had one by Professor Sorcha McLeod on business, human rights, and gender. So how those kind of questions are intersecting. We have courses on public ethics by Professor Richard Bellamy, a course on human rights and new technologies by my colleague, Dr. Francesca Palmiotto. And then the second year in the spring, it goes on migration and human rights by Dr. Grażyna Baranowska, and also inequality in finance and the distribution of health by Professor Mujahid Shaikh. So those are all professors or direct like affiliates to the Hertie School, and they basically, the electives can change depending on kind of the resources that they're going to have. Could you please send the slides after the session? Yeah, I'm pretty sure Sarah can do this. And scholarships for international students, other people have to say something. I know that the center also gives out some, and I was involved in selecting them in the past. And yeah, I'm pretty sure no one's going to delete the climate change course. It's so important towards that. But of course, if you have something what you really, really want to talk about, we're currently in the process of reorganizing for next semester. I'm very happy to take all of this into account. Fantastic. What type of additional opportunities, basically beyond just studying, does the center offer? And we have two big things of additional opportunities. On the one hand, we offer professional development courses by the Center for Fundamental Rights. And here in the this year, we offer two. These are, of course, elective, so you can choose that. One is by Sam Dubberly from Human Rights Watch, and he has given a course on open source investigations for human rights, ethic, method, and practices. Like I said, he was one of the people who worked quite a lot on the Mariupol opera kind of bombing and kind of the digital forensic about what happened actually in Mariupol, also to provide evidence, which can then, for example, be used before international courts and tribunals or other for NGOs in that sense for kind of judicial proceedings. And he's going to basically tell us about like how does it actually work? How do you do digital forensic and open source investigations by data? And on the other hand, we also had a course by Dr. Begum Bashtas, who worked here at the center and now works at Amnesty International, and she gave the course Strategic Campaigning for Human Rights. So how do we kind of campaign? How does the NGO process work in that sense? How can we design campaign objectives, and how can we bring human rights across a variety of audiences? So this is kind of the professional development. On the other hand, we also try to get you in touch with the latest research. So we are the center every semester has a fundamental rights research colloquium. This is something that I organize. And if you are participating, I think in 4 out of 5 sessions, which are always Wednesdays during lunch, you get a certificate for attendance in that sense. And here we invite external professors or external speakers to tell us about their recent research, for example. And here we have a special theme. So we had fundamental rights in the global economy. This semester we have human rights in the climate crisis. And next semester we will have fundamental rights, discrimination, and inequality. And we're just inviting basically different external speakers to get us up to date about their latest research. Can you do this certification within courses? No, basically this is additional opportunity for you to also get into touch with like work in progress. Do students go and work for UN from MIA? I have no clue in that sense about the statistics about that, but in that sense, I think international organizations are a very, very popular job vision for many students in the group. Are these courses mandatory or is class not specialization? So the blue courses, if you go back, the blue courses are mandatory, and the gray or the brownish ones are ones you can basically elect if that's the elective you choose in international law and human rights. Okay, did I get all the questions? What is the median grade? That I don't know. I'm sorry. That's beyond my statistical knowledge about that. What else is there? What else do we try to do at the center to get you into touch? So one of the things is that we do a fundamental rights in practice. So this is something that are kind of events we very often organize in the evenings. They include, for example, workshops. For example, there's one has been recently on digital repression, but also movies on fundamental rights topics in that sense. We try to do networking events, so how you can meet practitioners. Now we had now one on international organizations and also human rights NGOs. We do site visits. So you do excursions to NGOs, for example, recently to Human Rights Watch, to Amnesty International, or to the German Institute for Human Rights, but also city walks, something we did in the past, a decolonial city walk of Berlin. And finally, if you think, okay, this is really my passion, you can join the student advisory board and organize your own events with the center. So we have a very popular student advisory board, which also gives us feedback of what type of events they would like, or what is something that they really would like to focus on more. And they co-organize with us their own kind of events. So for example, I think we really had a career fair about human rights, where I think 12 human rights NGOs and international organizations were there to get the students in touch with potential internship, potential employers, and so on. Okay, anything else? Job offering by the MIA. So this is also something that I think is for the Hertie to say. I think there's a very big focus. At least I get these emails where there's a lot of jobs offered in that sense. But of course, in that sense, a bit of this self-empowerment, I think, is really, really helpful and necessary. But also, like, there's a practical year, I think, where you can focus a bit more. What we try to do with the student advisory board is just show you that there's a lot available in Berlin and how to get into touch with that. What else? So if you want to know more, you can here go to the Hertie School Center for Fundamental Rights. We have a for students section in our homepage where you can just click through a lot of the things that I just told you about what we're trying to do with the students. And then I think finally, this is not a Q&A part. We really did it while talking. So please excuse this kind of like rapid going through it. But I think sometimes it's really helpful also to answer those questions when they come. And I hope you liked it, and I hope at least it made you more interested in international law, because I think it's one of the most fascinating areas of study and also of teaching, because many of you come from, like I said, from different backgrounds, from different jurisdictions, and you might experience international law quite differently than other students. And I think this is something that should be valued and should be also appreciated in a course like this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. That was a wonderful and very informative presentation. And thank you everyone for your questions. As a reminder, please try to keep the questions focused. We only have a few moments left, so if you're going to ask another question, please try to keep it focused to the content of the presentation or about the course in particular. Questions about funding or admissions will not be answered in this session. Unfortunately, we just don't have enough time, and we have other sessions that are specifically designated for those topics. On that note, here are some other upcoming sessions. Berlin Bound is a series, as I mentioned in the beginning. This is the second of 7 events. So later this week, we will have Moving to Berlin Part 1. So if you are an incoming student who is moving to Berlin to study at the Hertie School, please join us on Thursday, and this session is really focused on what happens before you move. And you can go to this QR code here, which will show you all of the events. Here are also below some resources that are available to you as an incoming student. Student Life and Student Funding are wonderful resources to you, and I have both of their emails on this slide, as well as my email, in case you would like to reach out with some more questions. And because of the volume of questions that we've had in this session, I'm sorry if we could not get to every single question, but I think Sylvia addressed many, many of them. So you did a wonderful job. Let's see if there's
Yes, I think there's a few more. I think one of them was on coursework, like what is how's the coursework balanced within the course? There's a lot of reading physical texts and laws. Yes, so in that sense, law is a text discipline, so we learn through the text. We will cut down a bit, I think, on the readings in that sense. Like I said, we also appreciate movies or podcasts in that sense, if that's more your jam. But of course, law is a text exercise. And we basically also say you have to have read the text before you come to class, because the idea is to use the class as an interactive discussion space, and it's also something to deepen our knowledge. But this is not a lecture. I'm not giving a lecture of what is in the reading, so I expect you to do the readings in that sense. And this also could be practical readings in case law. How does the Hertie School help in finding internships? I think there is a list always that the Hertie School is doing, also with internship options. From the center, we try to get you into touch with kind of human rights NGOs particularly. Can you access the reading list to prepare for the courses? Of course you can, but I think you don't have to in that sense. No, I think if you come after a good summer and with lots of energy to do the readings in that sense, it's definitely possible to enjoy your summer and then start reading. We usually will try to use a textbook. So in that sense, classical introduction to international law always help. So we have a few, I think there was a question on student jobs. So we have a few students who also work at the center who help us, for example, in organizing events or doing research. Is it possible to research on human rights violations related to the crimes? Yes, of course. So the Rome Statute is international criminal law, something which will feature in the course quite a bit. So in that sense, yeah, I think those were the questions. I think if I missed one during this 1 hour, then please let me know. Can we turn Eli for further? Yes, you can. So this is kind of a broad kind of Masters of International Affairs, of course. But like I said, for example, I studied also a Masters of Political Science and then an LLM, and I still am managing to do a PhD in law. And I think you will have the necessary knowledge to do that. But of course, it would mean that you have to focus also in your thesis on those kind of questions. At least that's something I would recommend you to do. Of course, the question is the bar exam. So this is not a completely law course. Your law courses will be limited. This is a Master of International Affairs, but you might have other knowledge which can be helpful for that.
Really quickly, I'll hop in to answer this question. If job opportunities are offered by the school or if you need to find a job yourself. Of course, it is your responsibility to find a job after you graduate. However, we have a career development team at the Hertie School who is there to help you look for work wherever it is that you might be looking. We also have a very active alumni network who is very willing to help each other. So especially, I mean, even if you're looking at Washington, D.C. or I don't know, Amsterdam or Tokyo, there are people from the Hertie School there, and they're always really willing to help. So this is one great resource that you have when you are job searching. And on the same note, are internships mostly for German speakers or for English speakers too? So of course we are located in Germany, so I would say a majority of internships out there are going to be in German, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible to find work or internships in English. I work completely in English, so I'm living proof that it is possible. I would say last time I spoke to a career development team, they have a list of employers who it's about 60% German speaking companies and 40% English speaking. So there's still a pretty large English presence there. So you can certainly look for internships within Germany or within your home country.
Yeah. So I, for example, when sometimes I find former Hertie students when I just engage with other people. So, for example, at Transparency International, I found a former Hertie student who now works there. I also found some people at Democracy Reporting International, at Human Rights Watch. So, in that sense, there is a significant amount of just English-speaking, at least NGO field that is exactly there. I put you also the Center for Fundamental Rights homepage in the chat, so you're happy to check that out. And all the people that work there at the moment will have the opportunity to be discussing coursework with teachers. Yes, so we'll have a check-in session in that sense, a coffee chat session every week. That's mostly online because it's mostly easier than just be on the campus, but of course happy to discuss also in campus where you can just come and ask questions in that sense. And this will be the respective teacher of that week, so we'll have plenty of time, and please use it. I think many students are afraid to use it, but this is actually encouraged, so check in and ask about that.
Great. I think this is a great stopping point. If for some reason we didn't get to your question, I just put my email in the chat, and so please reach out to me if we did not answer your question, and I will answer it or find the person who can answer it for you. And the very last question I'll answer is, I will not share the slides in specific, but I will have the recording of this session on YouTube, and you can reach out to me for the recording of it. So you can also see all of the answers that Sylvia gave to all of your lovely questions. I think this is a great stopping point. So I'm going to wrap